Before I introduce our wonderful speakers, let me apologize in advance if I happen to mispronounce any names. Please blame my tongue, not my heart. Feel free to correct me, and I promise to do better the next time. Without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce and call upon our first speaker, Dr. Sushama Nagarkar. Dr. Sushama Nagarkar is a Chief Technical Officer at Dr. Anjali Morris Education and Health Foundation. She has a doctorate in special education from the University of Missouri and is a nationally certified school psychologist in the US. In 2014, she set up Yash Charitable Trust, an NGO with a vision that persons with developmental disabilities will live and work in the community of their choice with dignity and self-respect. Dr. Nagarkar has worked with other educational entities such as the Gateway School Mumbai, the Bubble Center for Autism in Bangalore, and has been a resource person for the Forum for Autism Mumbai. She brings a unique perspective of walking the walk and not just talking the talk, as she is a parent of an adult with autism. Dr. Nagarkar will provide insights into defining specific learning disabilities and the significant impact they have on students. She will also highlight the vital role of early identification and intervention in fostering better outcomes for learners. There will be a short question and answer session post her presentation. Please join me in welcoming our very own Dr. Sushama Nagarkar.
And thank you for giving me this opportunity, everyone. It's wonderful. Been having a great time since yesterday afternoon. So yeah, just before I get started, would like to know who's in the audience today. So, of course, the most important people are those with neurodivergence themselves and the family members. So if you could just, with a show of hands, if you're a parent, if you're a person with neurodiversity, if you could just raise your hands. Thank you for that. Next, of course, it's the teachers. Who else is here from the school system? Teachers, administrators. Wow, okay, great. Occupational therapists, psychologists, speech language pathologists, physiotherapists, and anyone else I've missed out. Thank you. This is a very vast topic. I've been given directions as to how to go. Not going to quite follow those directions. You'll have to excuse me for that. But just want to bring out some issues, some challenges, some solutions, and just what life is like. As she mentioned earlier, that I do work in the adult space now primarily, and that is where the rubber hits the road. It is when a neurodiverse child becomes a neurodiverse adult, that is sort of now what kind of a situation, in India particularly. And we just need to do a whole lot in helping adults lead quality lives just like the rest of us do. And so that's where my work is primarily right now. But then this whole journey of Morris Foundation and children's experiences in school are so vital towards creating those spaces of success as adults. And so kind of I'm going to lead you down that pathway. Introduction. Does this work? Oh. Okay, you can tell I haven't done this for a long time. So by virtue of being a signatory to the United Nations Convention of Persons with Disabilities, in 2016, India had to establish a law for the rights, and which is called the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016. Now, this is very different from the earlier Act of 1995, and one of the key differences, this is, by the way, an excellently written piece of legislation. It is extremely comprehensive. It deals with all aspects of a person's life, starting from early identification to schooling to education to vocational training to employment, and then of course living. opportunities, social services, everything. It covers it all. And it is, the most important piece of this is that it is based on what we know as the social model of disability. So which says that although, you know, there are persons with different disabilities, it is for us around them to create those important support systems to support individuals in all stages of their life. So it is really very well written, but there are challenges, as there are with everything else in India. There are 28 states in India, all of whom are supposed to, by virtue of this law, develop their own rules, frame their rules, and ways, policies to implement this act. Guess which is the one state in the 28 states, and I think 8 union territories, that does not have rules in place? Anyone? You can guess. It's fine. It is Maharashtra. It is Maharashtra. And if there's any government official out here, I'm sorry to say this, but it is shameful. It really is shameful. There are places like Nagaland, Mizoram, all of these states that are really struggling with larger issues that have wonderful pieces, the wonderful rules and implementation policies in place. Maharashtra doesn't. So it's up to us, ladies and gentlemen, to create a groundswell for this to happen. And why is it important for this to happen? It is because it frames what we can and cannot do. We can go to the Disability Commissioner with our grievances, with our difficulties, only when there are rules that define this. So please, if you have any influence anywhere at all, please get this done. We don't even have a state advisory board right now, which is reprehensible. I mean, there's no excuse for this, in my view. Sorry. So the Act does cover now, since 2016, 21 disabilities. In the 1995 Act, learning disabilities was not evident, neither was autism. Right now, in the present Act, there are 21 disabilities, most of which are applicable to us as school-related professionals, except, of course, Parkinson's disease. But yes, it covers all of these disabilities and gives very concrete guidelines about how these are assessed, coming to that in a bit. But yeah, the good news is that learning disabilities is now covered under this. The definition of specific learning disabilities in the Act is pretty much taken from IDEA, I think, unless in Britain they have a similar definition. So it is, you can read this, but it's a heterogeneous group, of course. And the main feature is the processing or the acquisition of language that will help children to then be able to be successful in schools. We see dyslexia, dysgraphia, all of these in our schools as well. The downside of this is that they have only taken this piece from the IDEA definition. They have not included what we call in our field rule-outs for this. But then I'll get to that and give you examples a little later about that. And that's a concern. That is a concern. Prevalence rates. Malti alluded to this a little while ago. They're all over the place. And they're all over the place, which you can see on this chart here. I tried to pick up just the latest ones for you. It's 2.87 in 2018, all the way up to 15% in 2012, which is an earlier one. The worrying one is the 37%, where there are emotional issues associated with the learning disabilities. The reason that this is all over the place are manifold: small sample sizes, inadequate testing assessment tools, tools given in a language that is different from the language of instruction, could be, tools given in a language that perhaps the child, because the child is a English language learner, is not able to comprehend. So there are a lot of challenges with this. We also, unfortunately, in a lot of places use tools which are like 20 and 30 years old. So the norms have not been updated. Again, a major challenge. So I think a safe bet would be between 10 and 15% perhaps nationwide. But again, this is just a guesstimate. Anyway, the point is that learning disabilities do exist, and they do exist in India as well. Causes, there is no, of course, as with almost all neurodiverse populations, there is no one cause that has been ascertained, at least not to my knowledge. But of course, we look at all of these various factors. There is definite evidence to show that within families, the chances, the preponderance is higher when a parent has a learning disability. That has been documented. There is also documented evidence that when the mother during pregnancy has alcohol, drug issues and so on, that has been documented, that the chances of a child developing learning disabilities or any other disability are higher. And then there are all these others. Environment is another one that's been studied quite a bit, and that's true for all neurodiverse populations as well, autism included in that one. But yes, causes are manifold. Again, the point is that disabilities exist, and we have to review all of this when we actually assess for this. So in schools, we primarily see a couple of these disabilities, dyslexia being the major one. Almost 80%, I would say, and Martin, you probably have better figures, 80% of the research done is for dyslexia. Because that is, I mean, reading does sort of impact everything else. And so that's the one that's been researched the most and also has the most backing in terms of what the evidence says as far as interventions go. And so learning to read, in the early years, we would see difficulties with just manipulating the sounds of the language, what we call phonological awareness, and that becomes a red flag in very early years. Acquisition of language, the ability to be able to manipulate language, be able to pull apart a word, or be able to blend a word, or be able to identify rhymes and so on and so forth. Those are the early markers of this. For later possible difficulties. Dysgraphia, of course, is the actual act of writing, and not only handwriting, but also putting that content from thoughts, what we're thinking about, into actual written text, is the other one that we see a lot. And then dyscalculia, number sense, understanding numbers, understanding how to manipulate numbers, and so on. I haven't, and I've worked in the US as a psychologist, haven't seen too much of dyspraxia in the schools that I worked in. Not to say it doesn't exist, but I just don't know what the preponderance of dyspraxia is. Developmental aphasia really has to do with language, so it's oral comprehension. Your ability to, again, learn and then be comfortable in the language. Listening comprehension and oral expression are the two parts of this, which are, again, in IDEA, they are different categories of learning disabilities, but they come under the whole umbrella of language disability. So the signs in preschool, again, this list is not at all exhaustive. There are many resources out there on the internet. But as Malti said earlier, that it is really important for preschool teachers to know these and to know what to look for. Again, we don't want false positives, so we don't want to alarm ourselves. But preschool teachers need a lot of guidance, and then I'm thinking education, in how to identify kids who are struggling. And what we typically say is, just do a brief informal sort of game with your entire class. Who are the kids who are doing really badly and at the bottom of the class in that game? It could be a simple game such as, okay, you have the word popcorn. Break it up, pop and corn. And I'm giving you actually an older example, but that's what came to mind. So who are the kids who are struggling with just the simple game of breaking up the word into its two component parts? And, you know, by virtue of games, identify those kids who are at the bottom of the class and intervene. Play more games, teach parents how to do this, but do it at that age. Because we want to rule in or rule out whether the kid is struggling because of just development, and we know that development is different for every child, or whether there's another difficulty that's going to come down the road that we need to intervene early. My fear in India, honestly speaking, is because the guidelines are so narrow, is that we might end up identifying too many kids. And when you identify a kid with a disability, it's for life. Yeah. Learning disabilities are not going to go away, as we've discussed. So we need to do a very careful job of identifying who are those kids that really need this. We don't want to hamper them in any way, because that can happen. But we also want to identify them, intervene early. We also want to consider those kids who may be at risk, but yet can, with a little bit of added time, take away the TV and have family dinner together at the dining table and talk. One intervention that is truly needed today. You know, those kinds of things, we want to do it early on. And so prevent those who don't really need a diagnosis eventually. So the government's trying. On the website of the Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities, there is this laundry list of what they have in place currently. And this last document that I've sort of circled is their latest guidelines from 2024. So I was telling some of these girls yesterday, it's an 800-page document that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's in two languages, Hindi and English. I tried reading over the English one just to upgrade my own knowledge about this. It was really hard to do. My point is that, again, the government is trying. I don't know who's written this. My suspicion, again, is that this had to be put out at a certain date. Somebody from the top said that you have to put this out, and therefore put it out. Nobody proofread the document, so it's quite difficult. What these guidelines say is that the first, one of the recommendations is that you do screening early on, which is absolutely the right way to do it. It doesn't tell you how to do it. The NCERT has, and this is an open source again, it's available to everyone, has put out this wonderful, I think it's wonderful, booklet for identifying all disabilities, the ones that are pertinent, I'd say 20 that are pertinent to the schools, at the level of the classroom teacher. Now, how wonderful is that? So the classroom teachers can actually use this to identify children that they suspect of having any of the 20 disabilities that are relevant. It's freely available. So the screening, so they have screening items for all 20 disabilities in this booklet. And these are the ones that are pulled out for learning disabilities. All very relevant, this is the language they have used. So it's very, very simply written. And this is an enormous step forward in my view. But it's done by the NCERT, which is kudos to the NCERT. I don't know whether this is available in other languages. I could only find it in English. But what the teacher has to do is use this tool for all the children in the classroom. That's the recommendation, mind you. But there are other ways, and I know classroom teachers are bogged down, but there are other ways that they could use, other mechanisms they could use, and only administer this tool to those few that they know potentially are at risk, right? So there are 10 items on this tool. What this doesn't give you is how many of these sort of should we check off, we check off whatever the child has difficulties with, but does 4 out of 10 take the child to the next level, or does 2 out of 10 take the child, or do you just bark off what you think is a problem? Anyway, it's a step in the in the absolute right direction. One of the things that I would have sort of be careful about is number 8. Students reversing letters in the early grades is natural. And so there's nothing in the guidelines in this document that says, don't worry about it if it happens in pre-K or K or first grade. Don't worry. There's nothing that says that. So I would worry about, not supporting this enough with examples, and I hope in the next edition of this that they do that, is give examples of when these become sort of red flags, at what age or what grade level, which they haven't done currently. But as I said, at least it's a step forward. And the beauty of it is that there's an app available. iPhone walas, forget it. There are Android apps. There's an Android app available. You can download it. The part 1 is what classroom teachers will administer. And then what they recommend is that special educators or professionals in the schools go on and look at these and then try and validate that by observing in the classroom. Now, I would recommend for administrators to please set aside time, do this in your schools, and use this tool. Set aside time in your special educators' time schedule to use the tool and do it. And let's try and come up with some kind of database on how this is working, because there's nothing right now. But again, it is just wonderful and it is absolutely doable. So this is a great achievement in my view. It's freely available at that site. So then coming back to the guidelines for assessment for learning disabilities, the guidelines talk about the grade level assessment device. Has anyone used this ever? Has anyone heard of it? Yes. Yeah, they teach it to you, right, in your courses. This tool, from my research, is roughly developed in the early 90s. And it is the recommended tool in the 2024 guidelines. What is wrong with that picture? It's a curriculum-based tool. Has the curriculum changed?
Yes.
Are there different curriculums?
Yes.
You get the point that I'm trying to make, okay? So this has been recommended in the 2024 guidelines. It is nothing against the author. She's very well known in the field, lots of respect, but there's a problem with using this. It is available only up to the 4th standard. So the guidelines, again, don't say what you're supposed to do after that. If you suspect a child has a disability in the 5th standard, for example. I don't like this tool, you can tell. The NIMHANS battery was what was recommended in the earlier guidelines of 2017. At the time, they only had, I think, 1 level available. Now there are 2 levels available, but the guidelines in 2024 don't say use this as an alternative or use this in conjunction with. But this is another tool that is available. Now there are lots and lots of problems also with the NIMHANS battery. So if a child is at 4th grade and scores instructionally at the 1st grade, you identify the child as having a learning disability. Again, it's curriculum based. I would strongly urge anyone who's inclined to do this is to go and read this article. Again, it's an open source article. You can freely get it, download it, read it. If you are inclined to use the NIMHANS battery, because it does a super job of telling you how you should use the battery, A, but more importantly, what are the challenges in doing interpretation by using this battery. So please read the article before you even attempt to use the NIMHANS battery. Again, something else that I don't like for various other reasons. They just don't have good reliability, validity, nothing has been documented, and that is a concern again. So what are the best practices in assessment? The guidelines do make a very cursory note of saying, you should do this, you should contact the family, blah, blah, whatever that is. But we really, really need to, as I mentioned earlier, do a very good job of collecting information and getting the right data. So understanding the background information, understanding where the child is, what the early learning history is, what the development is of the child. School records are very important, of course, to look at sort of what the trajectory of success or failure has been for the child. And then multiple observations. And ladies and gentlemen, observations don't have to be 1 hour. Maybe they've told you in your courses that they have to be very long. They can be brief, 15-minute observations, but across multiple subjects. If a child doesn't like to read and write for whatever reason, they're not going to do well in a class where they're teaching English. They might do well in a class where they're teaching maths or some other science or some other subject that has more practical to it. You have to establish that this is truly difficulty that he or she is facing across all the subjects that they have to do and have to take. So multiple observations. If there's anything that I would recommend for teachers here, it is to keep observing your children. Teacher reports, of course, are very important. A lot of teachers just have this intuitive knowledge of what their children's difficulties are. And then the test information, which corroborates and brings together everything that we collect. We have to do this for every child when we are suspecting a learning disability. We just have to. It's ethically the right thing to do. Just thought I'd give you my view on this, but of course it is the first thing, unfortunately, that we think about when we see that a child is having difficulty is have they had an IQ test. In the beginning, and I don't think Medha will mind me saying this, my first year or two at Morris Foundation, it is like, but ma'am, we have to do the IQ test. And I'd say, why? But we've always done the IQ test. I said, go back and read the guidelines, go back and read the definition. It is not needed. Why do we have this sort of, why do we rely on this dung test so much? When I was in the schools in the United States, I was the psychologist across multiple schools and of course helping in the part of the assessment team. You know, kids with autism have difficulties, and those of you know, but I just have to tell you this. 3 different main areas. One is language. The second one is interpersonal relationships and interpersonal, any kind of communication. Third one is the behaviors related to the sensory differences. These are the kind of 3 broad categories. How can we expect a kid with autism who has language challenges be able to answer a question on a verbally loaded IQ test? It's very difficult. And when the child scores a 0 on this, on a test like that, is it right? We assume that the child doesn't know information because a child can't express him or herself. So I have a big problem with administering IQ tests where they're not needed. In this case, they're not needed. The only reason that an IQ test would be needed is if we are suspecting that that child has an intellectual disability. That is the only reason. And how will we know that? By going back and collecting other pieces of information before we do that. So let's try and not follow this. I don't know whether it's reliance or it's just a blanket, what is it called? Like Peanuts has, you know, the blanket. It's just our comfort in administering these. Yes, IQ tests are required. Yes, when we have to identify the gifted population or the twice able population, we do want to do it. But we have to be able to say, yes, it's needed, and no, we don't need it. And not rely over. It's really heavily. When we came back from the US in 2013, Aarti and I had to go through the motions of getting her a disability certificate. Back then, they didn't have the UDID card. So I took her to JJ Hospital in Bombay, and I don't know if any of you have had experiences of trying to get the UDID. It's a nightmare, and it continues to be a nightmare even now. The point was that she was taken into the psychiatry department. The lady was asking her verbally a subset of, I think she was using the Mullins, I don't know what she was using. She asked her 4 or 5 questions, and on the basis of that determined that Aarti in those days had mental retardation, because that was what was documented as a disability. Again, misused, badly used, I mean, just ethically wrong. But heck, I was going there as a parent, not as a psychologist. So I said, you know, I need this disability certificate. So I just let it slide. But yes, there is a lot of misuse. So please be really careful. Because again, we are, you know, we're talking about kids and their future. And we need to be very, very sure in what we're doing. The other piece that has to come into any kind of protocol for assessment and evaluation is whether the child truly has a skill deficit, or the child is just disinterested, needs to be motivated to perform better, and so shows a performance deficit. And this is really important, again, to pull apart, only because a learning disability will truly identify as a skill deficit. We have kids who just are not disinterested. I mean, sometimes our school systems really suck, excuse my French. And children are just, then they don't want to be there oftentimes. And we see that, where children are failing or children are doing badly. So we have to pull these things apart. The strategies, of course, in the skill deficit would be to teach. The strategies for a performance deficit would be to motivate and then reassess. And so that's why finding the difference between these two is really important. How are we doing on time? Whoops. Okay, so coming back to what the definition in the law, RPWD, did not mention, which is a problem, is all these other rule-outs. So a learning difficulty, if a child has very low vision, a learning difficulty may be attributed or impacted, hearing is impacted, could be attributed to sensory challenge, sensory deficits, right? Emotional behavioral issues may be the reason, again, like I mentioned earlier about performance deficit, that the child has difficulties. An intellectual disability has to be ruled out. You can't have a learning disability and an intellectual disability. If a child has autism or any other PDD-like symptoms and behaviors, then it's oftentimes the autism supersedes the learning. It's not that they don't have difficulties learning, but it's primarily due to the autism. Absenteeism is another big one that we have to rule out. If a child is not in school, it's not right to say that the child has difficulties because of an actual skill deficit. So again, taking that into account. Sometimes we just have, and excuse me for saying this, but really bad teachers. So again, administrators have to be on top of their game in trying to rule this out as a factor of a teacher not being able to teach the way a child needs to be taught. And then, of course, a big one in India is the language. Now, our children, outside of the 6 hours that many of our children, outside the 6 hours that they spend in schools, spend the rest of their day in a language that is very different from the language of instruction. Most of us do that. Many of us do that, actually. And so we have to rule out, again, the impact of this. So encouraging families, again, I would advocate for the instruction being in the same language as their home language. There's a lot of benefit to learning in the same language. But again, we have to rule out whether the child has this language in the home being so different and being so... For example, in schools, and those of you who work in schools, you'll see this on the playground, or where in the lunchroom when they're eating tiffins, or any time across the classroom, except for the classroom. They revert back to their own language, oftentimes. So ruling out this as being an impact on their learning is very important. And then economic factors, of course, poverty, children who come from poverty, who don't have good, home situations. And these days, of course, to add to this would be time spent on devices, time spent just where parents are really busy, and parents have to work, of course, but parents are busy doing other household chores. Child sits in front of the television and eats dinner. There's not a lot of language spoken in the home. Any language needs to be spoken in the home. They just have to have communication and language. They have to hear language all the time. And a lot of our households these days, that doesn't happen, unfortunately, which is another challenge for us. But we have to rule these out before we rule in that a child may be having disabilities. Learning disabilities are real. Oftentimes in the past, I've been privy to some conversations where parents will come and report, yeah, my child is just lazy, doesn't want to do this, blah, 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 all that, but they're very real. And we don't have to wait for children to go to 3rd grade or beyond to identify, and let's not do that. The sooner that we can, if we have the data, the sooner we can identify kids early, the sooner the interventions start. And apart from the interventions, the law gives us a really good way to help these kids through what, I'll come to that slide, but what's called accommodations and modifications. So if I have a reading disability and I need somebody to read with me, that's not to say don't stop my reading intervention, but for tests and exams and so on and so forth, if I need somebody to read for me, which equalizes the playing field for me, I need to get that sooner than later, not a 10th standard. We need to have it in place if we have an identified disability. And the law lets you do that. If children are struggling with calculations, for example, allow them to use a calculator in the classroom. That is what they're entitled to do. And let them use it for life. So what? I mean, if that is truly a need and it's truly a gap, creating problems for the children, and we've data to identify that, and it's a disability, we need to be able to provide the accommodations and modifications, and should be providing these as soon as the child is identified. I know a lot of schools are reluctant to do this, and I don't understand why. And it's a child's right to have it. So that's another thing. Of course, they're lifelong, as we've said, and too much TV and doesn't cause learning disabilities. Too much TV may cause other kinds of problems, but not learning disabilities. So I want to share with you a very small clip. Devendra was, he used to work with us, as I said, I work with adults now, and has now moved on to another space. But he has a very interesting take on how he's managing his disability. And I was very impressed because for the longest time while he was with us, he refused to acknowledge the fact that he had a reading disability, and for his own reason. But just listen to what he has to say.
Hello, my name is Devendra Pansare. I'm working with Earth Cafe as a senior captain. I'm suffering from dyslexia, reading and writing dyslexia. But AI today, especially the applications like ChatGPT, Google Translate, has made my life much easier.
Can you describe a little bit how you use it?
For example, if we want to draft an email regarding it, you just have to put the subject on ChatGPT and ChatGPT rests for you. That's the main advantage. It is available in all the languages, whichever you are comfortable with. That's the main plus point of it. Though you want to type it in English and you want to understand in Hindi or Marathi, the options are open over there. That's the main benefit of it.
That's fantastic. And you are able to then do a much more be more successful.
Yeah, the problems which I used to face 10 years earlier are now completely resolved, I would say.
Is it easy to learn, Devendra, for people who
Yeah,
don't know?
it is easy to learn. You just have to install the application and you have to ask the AI the AI itself asks you how he can help you, and that is a good platform I suggest for people like us.
Are there any dangers or anything that?
Yeah, the dangers I suggest, like if you're using an AI, be careful with some Google settings. Don't expose your personal life in AI. That's the main thing. Rest, if you want to work it professionally, it's really a good application.
It's fantastic.
Or else, best you can do, if you want to use an AI, keep another device that's only for the job purpose.
Oh, that's a good point. Only for using the AI.
Only for using AI for job purpose.
Wonderful. So while he was with us, Devendra was
Hello, my name.
While he was with us, Devendra was our coordinator of our food services. We work in the food section. I mean, we work with food, creating skilling and employment opportunities. And he had a lot of trouble with his emails, communicating with people and so on. And now his world has changed. Of course, that's a different debate as far as where AI and the use of AI goes. But for him, he's found a way to make it work for him. So this is something that he discovered by and he is now way more confident than he ever has been and is open about his challenges. So this has been a remarkable, for me, I saw him after a year or so, but it has been a remarkable step forward in helping him to get his adult life to a place where he's really feeling successful for himself. So again, the RPWD tells us about, talks extensively about reasonable accommodations. And this is, as I mentioned earlier, this is something we really need to consider for all our kids. And when they have an identified disability, we need to put these in place early on. Because it's all about helping kids be successful, right? And what we need, what they need is something that teachers and administrators in schools will be able to assess and should be giving them this. Another example of reasonable accommodation. So,
my name is Sushama. My age is 31 years old. I have completed 12. I am an assistant trainer in ICT.
and actually you've had reading problems, difficulties in your schooling, right? So now you're showing us a chart here. Can you tell me, how do you manage to work? You're an assistant trainer and you're able to do a lot of stuff. How do you work? आणि मराठीत सांगितलंस तरी चालेल.
मी चार्ट बघून रेसिपी बनवतो.
आणि चार्ट बघून तुला मग फायदा होतो की जास्त वाचायला लागत नाही. आणि अक्षय काय काय बनवतोस जरा सांगशील का?
मी व्हाईट ब्रेड बनवतो, राजीपाव बनवतो, कुकीज बनवतो, केक्स बनवतो, चीज केक.
आणि सगळं इंडिपेंडेंटली. किती वेळ लागला? किती आता महिने तू आता हे सगळं शिकलास? म्हणजे किती महिने झाले? 1 year. So in 1 year you're now an employee आणि assistant trainer म्हणून काम करतोस. But I think over here in the bakery, Akshay, they call you whenever they need you, right? जास्त काम असेल की तुला बोलवतात. इव्हेंट असेल तर तुला बोलवतात. जास्त ब्रेड करायचं असेल तर तुला बोलवतात. Yeah, and you're actually teaching the other person here how to cook. That's wonderful. What is your future plan?
The plan is to set up my own business.
Your own business, a bakery. Lovely. Thank you. What's that noise? Thank you. In a year, Akshay has managed to learn and execute entirely independently all the recipes in our bakery system. Now again, there's motivation to do it. He just needed something to support him by way of a visual chart because he has difficulties with reading in doing this. Simple, right? But now he leads a valued life. He's respected, and he genuinely is able to manage the bakery entirely independently. This is a person who struggled all his life. So this is possible when we know the individual and when we are able to provide what they need to make it worth their while. So caregivers, of course, have to look after themselves. It's not the end of the world. I am a parent of an adult with autism. I go through challenges myself, periods of, God, what are you doing, kind of a thing. But again, I take my time off, go off and where the phone doesn't work primarily, and take time out for myself. My point is that we have to figure out what is best, of course, for our child, but also for the entire family. And the family as a unit has to look after themselves when we have children with disabilities in the unit. I know all of us want inclusion in all of us, and I don't think we have time. I wanted to share a Purva story, but we don't have time. Right? We need question answers, right? It's a very interesting story. I'll just... Sorry, would you like to see it? Okay, I'll share it.
Will you share a little bit about your earlier school experiences?
कुठल्या शाळेत होतीस? So I was in Bombay, Cambridge. There I failed 3 times, as I hear from my parents. First to senior, junior KG में था. Then I don't remember when. The last I remember is 7th. बीच में कब fail हुई I don't know. But some 3 times I have flunked in whatever way. So my age people, they never had seen such
Someone failing like this.
Consistently or whatever. So their reaction towards me changed. कि मैं पास हो रहा हूँ, तुझे क्या हो रहा है? Why can't you?
So that was hard.
But ठीक है, हो जाएगा, ठीक हो जाएगा. I had that motto in head कि अभी ये शायद space है which I am going through. अगर घर पे ये चीज़ बताती तो कैसे बताती? मन करता था कि सुबह उठ के स्कूल में नहीं जाऊँ, लेकिन 1000 क्वेश्चंस आएंगे. क्यों नहीं जाना है? क्या जाना है? चकट वो जो विभाग देखा जाता है.
So you were very brave.
Brave situation बना दी. Anybody is not brave in the beginning or जो भी, but circumstances, the way people behave, react, that makes you brave.
And so you finished your 7th there?
7th में बोला गया कि she cannot cope in 8th, so it's better shift her to some special aided school. उसके बाद भी the behavior of people change कि अगर मैं सो रही हूँ तो कोई उठा नहीं, कोई पूछ रहा नहीं. You can sense it कि
वैसे भी जा रहे हैं
अत्ताकट होने की कगार पे हो. Because otherwise people क्यों सो रही है? ये कर, वो कर, क्यों नहीं करना है? There are ample questions which come across you. वैसे कुछ आया नहीं. तो one day my parents told me कि we have to discuss something. वो मुझे पहले से पता था कि क्या डिस्कस करने वाले. तो I was really cool about it कि we are removing you from the school because हम लोगों को बोला गया कि you cannot go. मैंने कहा ठीक है. बस दूसरी चीज़ जहाँ जा रही है वो बेटर होनी चाहिए. That was my thing.
So where did you go from there?
From there I went to Drishti, which is in Antegi West. वो भी प्रतीक के मॉम ने कहीं से तो बोला था कि वहाँ पे दिनाज बाड़िया है, वो मैनेज कर रही है, ट्राई करके देख लो एंड ऑल दैट. सो ये अभी सिचुएशन पता है. 2 दिन में मैं जाने वाली हूँ दृष्टि में. आई एम स्टिल इन बॉम्बे कैम्ब्रिज. I am thinking यार तभी हिंदी का पीरियड चालू था. I am thinking टीचर कुछ बोल रहे थे, I am not paying attention because as it is मैं पक गई हूँ स्कूल से. मैंने यार नेक्स्ट स्कूल कैसा होगा? I remember this is the pose I am taking and I am thinking अच्छा होगा क्या? पता नहीं. बुरा होगा तो मुझे तो एक्सपीरियंस है हैंडल कर. और बॉम्बे कैंपस में वर्कशीट्स होते हैं, आधा से ज़्यादा एक दो भरे रहेंगे, बाकी सारे ब्लैंक ही होते हैं. बिकॉज देयर दे हैड साइक्लिकल टेस्ट, सर्कुलर टेस्ट, दिस इंटरनल, दैट इंटरनल, और फिर फाइनल तक तो मैं अभी नहीं करना, अभी सैचुरेशन हो गया. तो नेक्स्ट थिंग एट दृष्टि बुक्स होते थे, नोटबुक्स, एंड वी हैड टू फिल इन दोज बुक्स. एक्सपीरियंस पहले वाला था. मेरा सेंटेंस लिख के नहीं हुआ, बोर्ड रब हुआ. अरे मेरा सेंटेंस लिख के होना बाकी है, हाउ कैन यू जस्ट रब इट? और मैंने यहाँ पे बोल के देखा कि मैम मेरा सेंटेंस लिख के होना बाकी है. टेक योर ओन टाइम. हैं, डू यू रियली मीन व्हाट आर यू सेइंग? देखिए यार, टेक योर ओन टाइम. देखो भारी है. फिर वो लोग ने पूछा कि हो गया है कि क्या है वाइप. मैंने कहा ये मस्त है, ये पूछते रहे वाइप करने से.
So big difference between the two.
So that was the thing.
And then you cleared your NIOS.
NIOS 10th.
So Apurva initially went to a school quite well known in her part of the town, her part of Mumbai, which claims to be inclusive. But her experiences in that school, and I apologize for the audio, were terrible, really bad. From there she went then to a special school where they were doing NIOS, and the focus was on NIOS. And when they sort of gave her those accommodations of take as much time as you need, suddenly she was able to do exactly what she needed to do. And so my point is that as caregivers, when we want inclusion, and it is the right thing to do and our kids deserve it. Oh, I'm sorry. Do I have to repeat what I said, or you guys heard me? Anyway, so when she was put in, when we as caregivers, we want inclusion for our kids, of course we do, and it's their right to be in an inclusive environment. We have to make that choice as to whether the inclusion in this particular environment is really what it should be. And that's a difficult decision to make, but like there are lots and lots of kids like Apurva who just have very, very bad experiences in schools when inclusion is not done the right way. And that was the point that I was trying to make. Now she is confident, she's happy. When she first came to us, I was, of course, every adult who comes to us, we do kind of an interview and kind of understand who the person is. When we started talking about her early school experiences, she started crying. And obviously, I mean, we're new. Apurva is very brave. She's very kind of controls herself. But it was just overwhelming for her even thinking about that. So it can have very detrimental long-term consequences if we try and push our children into an inclusive setup where the inclusion piece is not well handled. So that's just an FYI that I want to give you.
Will you share?
Parting thoughts is, I think all of us have to be very, very focused on understanding strengths of all the different children we serve. When we employ a strength-based approach and we take care of the differences and the difficulties through supporting them, there are very, very positive outcomes. I know teachers are oftentimes stressed with test results and this, and everyone has to pass and all of those higher level things that we have to do. But we do need to understand that diversity, neurodiversity, is a part and parcel of our lives. It is. All of us are neurodiverse in some way, shape or form. Some kids have more difficulties, some you don't even see it till very much later in life. The point is that everyone has strengths that we can use, and there are lots of different ways that we can help children succeed in school. One is by intervening early, by coming to conferences like this or any other, and educating ourselves as to what I need to do differently. And the second one is believing that everyone belongs, everyone should have opportunities to be the best version of themselves that they can be. Working in the adult space now for over 10 years, it's been extremely rewarding for me. I learn every day from the adults that we have the privilege to serve, is that everyone has a place, and we have to believe that. And when we believe that, that guides everything that we do in our professional and personal lives. That's my soapbox. Thank you.
Sushma, it was a very enlightening experience to hear you. I fully agree with you with the last point that you made, that many of us are responsible for creating problems in children's life. We are pushing children for things they are not ready. Our desire to see them really go ahead, forgetting the basics. We are just avoiding the basic foundation and expecting them to do the higher level of learning. That is creating all the problems. And regardless of any number of curriculum changes the government has suggested, most of the schools are still, after the children starting at very higher level, forgetting what they should be doing earlier. And secondly, I would like to have your comment on the last thing you wrote, you showed was myths and misconceptions. You have said diet, but what about nutrition in the earlier years? Doesn't that have effect on the brain and severity of it? And in our country, it's very sad, large number of children are suffering from malnutrition. Recently we have started working in a brick clinic providing health services, but we observed that these people are living only on rice. All 3 meals are only rice. What is happening to these children? And you could see the color of the hair. Maybe right now they are looking okay, but somewhere that trauma has taken place because their hair are all bronze. They are classical cases of marasmus.
And certainly, ma'am, these would be those cases that we don't really talk about in the larger. Certainly, these are cases and these are situations that we don't primarily, when we talk about this, it's more in the global kind of sense, but 100% agree with you. When kids have such severe cases of malnourishment, it's going to impact them, certainly.
Management is one, but this concept, so we are creators of creating problems in children.
Comes from words of wisdom here. Any other questions?
Just an observation.
Yeah, I see.
Very exciting session. Thank you.
It's on. We can hear you.
Hello. So, very enlightening session. Thank you. Eye-opener. And I could relate as a parent of a slow learner. I could relate so much. Even the struggle with the comment about the certificate and all that. So, relate a lot of stories that you brought in. So, the story of inclusion also. My question is that you mentioned about the assessments and the limitation of assessment with regards to the theory and language more. What if a child does not like books and sees everything in a visual? The visualization is very like the creative intelligence is very high, but IQ is okay. What about those children? Where do they find themselves, and what kind of assessments are available for them?
To answer the first part of your question, I think Shamim is going to be doing a session on UDL in the afternoon, and I think you might find some answers over there, because universal design for learning is really the way to go for children like the one, your son or daughter, your son that you're describing. Of how do we modify within the classrooms. That would be the way to go. In terms of assessment of creativity per se, I would have to refer you to maybe Malti's school or Nyan Prabodhini, where they do more assessments. I don't know off the top of my head how one would, what the standard tools are to measure that. And I don't know that there are tools, to be honest, to measure that. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, and I had a slide that I think I skipped over it, we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And that's what we're all doing. But if we could just create a square hole, that would be the answer to a lot of the challenges that we face. Yes, ma'am. Neha, good to see you.
Pleasure to hear you, and I keep missing the day. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the informative session. I still learn every day. I just had one doubt. When you mentioned about best practices to rule out, you also mentioned about pervasive developmental disorders like autism. So what happens is, I was just relating to new cases that have come to our center. When autism is not detected in the early stages, once they go to the schooling, like preschooling, they seem to have learning difficulties in the school. So how do you relate that? Because what is happening is currently, if they are not identified on the autism front, the children in the school are not able to understand them, nor are the teachers able to understand them. So they lose interest on the academic part, and then they are termed as having learning disabilities or not doing functioning well in the school. So if you can just give some information.
Once you and your staff get trained, and I underline the word trained, there is a free tool available on the internet, which is again a screening tool only. It's called the MChat. And that is for children who you potentially suspect of maybe being on the spectrum. So, but again, I emphasize training first, because it's very easy to create false positives. And so train yourselves, read up about it, and use this as a first step. Because what I was saying there is that if the difficulties with learning are attributed to autism, the intervention is a whole different ballgame, right? So you have to rule that out first before you say that the child has learning disabilities per se. Make sense?
Yeah, I just had an observation. An excellent session by you, Sushma. It created, I think it has, what do you say, popped so many questions in the minds of people who have attended the session. And my observation is on two things. One is, as you rightly said, the research part, because that is the basis of everything. And the second part is the inclusion part. So many schools are claiming to be inclusive schools, but unfortunately, a lot needs to be done. The teachers are not trained for handling, and I think Morris Foundation can, play a very, very important role in this, like we've been doing since so many years. And the second thing is, this girl, Apurva, her story was like, a universal story for our children with LD. And the one thing, like you said, like it's done here also, that despite my dyslexia, I can be successful. We just have to check the positives and the strengths in children. And she was a very good communicator. She could communicate herself so well. I'm sure that her profession, whatever she chooses, that should be the basic area where she should be in. And I'm really thankful to you too for this presentation.
I think there's a last question. Sorry, yeah, Shilpa, I'll give it to you. And because otherwise we'll get delayed, we're already running 10 minutes late. So last question for Shilpa.
Excellent session, ma'am. Thank you very much. My question is, I work with preschoolers, and you did mention that early intervention is very, very important. But my question is, how early is early? Because you also need parents' cooperation to do the intervention. So what are your thoughts about that?
As early as, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent session, ma'am. Thank you very much. My question is, I work with preschoolers, and you did mention that early intervention is very, very important. But my question is, how early is early? Because you also need parents' cooperation to do the intervention. So what are your thoughts about that?
As early as you first detect that the child is not meeting developmental milestones within that period that they're supposed to meet, that's when early intervention should start. And so getting with parents about what does a typical development look like, and of course it's a broad band. It's not at 3 you have to smile, or at 6 you have to roll over. It's a broad band, right? But having, I would say, if your school or your center, you have frequent discussions with parents about doing this. All children are going to benefit with early intervention. And when we talk about early intervention, it's not only tried and tested specific as written in the books. It's just, and I keep telling this to parents all the time, just talk to one another in the home. Just as simple as that, of having a home that's language enriched. It doesn't happen these days, unfortunately. And so starting as early as recognizing that the milestones are not being met within that is when we should start looking at these things. And it's a simple thing of just getting an assessment to see whether there is anything that I need to do as a parent. And then, of course, in school, working with the parent. The best outcomes are always when there's a team approach, always. There's no denying that. And so working alongside the parents, I think, would be. And, again, in the early stages, we never identify kids with disabilities. We always say developmental, lag or sort of delays, and work with those. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sushama, for your insightful talk on the need for policy revisions in Maharashtra, the overview of SLDs, the vital role of preschool teachers in early identification, and the introduction of the Prashas app and screening test. Thank you for also sharing all the wonderful videos and heartwarming videos of the young adults.